Welcome, everyone, to Los Libertinos podcast. I am your host, Carlos Abelard, and this is Chingazos and Fire episode number 61. Our guest today is Clint Russell. He is the host of Liberty Lockdown and a co-host of the Tower Gang podcast. He is a successful entrepreneur that was able to escape the rat race and retire before his 40s. He now dedicates... Whoa.
I have no
That's
idea what's
funny.
going on there.
All right, well, fuck it. We just keep going anyway, man. Oh, dude, that's weird.
Double vision of me. That is bizarre.
Yeah. We just let it roll. If it wants to do that, we just let it do that. It's okay. And if it goes back,
Yeah,
well, then
that's
fuck it.
strange.
Oh, there you go. That's funny.
All right.
Yeah. So, yeah, man. The intro is the intro. You've heard these intros before, man. But yeah, man. Welcome to Los Libertinos.
Thank you for having me, Carlos. I'm born and raised in San Diego, so I got a lot of I feel like kinship with the Mexican heritage. So I don't even know if you're Mexican, but Los Libertinos, I assume so.
Yeah. No, yeah. My parents are Mexican, so
Nice.
by that, yeah, So yeah, man. Could I like to do like a background because I like to say that my audience is half libertarian, so they would know some of your work, and the other half is tios, primos, primas, all of that. That don't know who what you got going on. So if you don't mind, can you kind of give a background and go, wherever you want to go, personal and some of the stuff that you've gotten into, and that way, everybody knows kind of what's up.
Sure. I'm at Liberty Lock Pod on Twitter, Liberty Lockdown on YouTube, Spotify, everywhere else. If anyone wants to check out my work. Yeah, I was a mortgage broker, entrepreneur for 15 years, and shut it down in May 2020 during the lockdowns to speak out against the lockdowns, which I knew were a catastrophic mistake right away. On top of the fact that I knew, our liberty was so damaged in that moment that we really had to begin the reclamation project instantaneously, or we would probably never retrieve it. So that was the reason I got involved. I'm a second gen libertarian, had no interest in being involved in this arena necessarily, but I've always been strongly opinionated and certainly lectured all my friends and family about libertarian ideology and belief systems my entire life. But really, the lockdowns are what got me catalyzed to be involved, or got me fired up, that I was like, okay, well, the Libertarian Party isn't coming out as aggressively against this stuff as they ought to be. Obviously, Tom Woods, Dave Smith, some others were, which I was grateful for, but I just felt as if like I needed to add to the ranks of vocal opponents to the lockdowns, and then to the vaccine mandates, and to every infringement on our rights that happened over the past 3 years. Also, because of my economic expertise, I understood on a more deep level how cataclysmic this would be for us economically. I knew that it would either create a complete deflationary bust because the debt would not be able to be paid, because our economy is highly predicated on debt at this point, almost entirely, or we would end up in an inflationary spiral because they would have to print and bail out the global economy, and they went the second path, and now we are dealing with that inflation. I think it has also led to increasing conflicts worldwide. I think that the Russia-Ukraine crisis probably doesn't end up in a hot war if not for the lockdowns. There's a lot of things that are knock-on effects that you ultimately can't predict in the moment, but are the probability of them increases because you're creating economic strife because of your terrible management of the global economy. And ultimately, I don't believe that there should be a manager of the global economy, which is another thing I focus on, is pushing back against central banks, the World Economic Forum, the World Bank, the IMF, all of it. So that's what I'm about, man.
Yeah. I when you say second gen libertarian, that means that you heard a lot of this stuff since you were probably very young. And I didn't get into it until I read and I'm not saying I got into it precisely because I read this book, but I felt that it was probably the path that opened it up. And in the intro, I said rat race because I read Rich Dad Poor Dad right after college, and I remember it's one of the only I've only read a couple books in my life. I'm not I don't really read a lot, and I read
Sure.
that one, man. That one just 1 or 2 days knocked it out. And I remember telling my parents, "Oh, I don't think I want to go to college anymore. I think I just want to." And they, they're cool. I mean, they're like, "Okay, whatever, just be the best you can," kind of thing. And I bring that up because I feel that that was when my mind turned into like I don't know. It was just a different something. Just you know, I don't know, man. Just something just woke in inside of me on that. And I don't know, man. I guess my question to you is kind of like if you have a moment. I know that you're second gen, but like, was there a moment where you knew that like the libertarian philosophy or that type of I don't know. I guess being open or more also. Oh man, like critical of different ways of looking at things. Because like to be libertarian to me a little bit is like and you got to see all sides of the stuff. You can't just always be,
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't know. Is there a time like that you have when you're like, oh, yeah, I'm second gen libertarian, but that doesn't mean that I had to be one. What was the moment that you kind of remember? Like, you know what, that was the one that really got me
Yeah.
going.
That's a good question, and there's actually, I mean, I think with everyone's life, there's many moments. There's not for me because I had already been exposed to these ideas as a 4 and 5 and 6 year old. It's not like I was just like, oh, I read End the Fed by Ron Paul, and now I'm a libertarian. It was like, no, I had these beliefs, but then they just kind of became more entrenched over time. I agree with you actually. Rich Dad Poor Dad, How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World by Harry Brown, The 4 Hour Work Week by Timothy Ferriss, uh, even Be Here Now by Ram Dass. Like, there's a lot of books that I've read over my life that like kind of got me more and more entrenched in this belief system. I think on top of that, being an entrepreneur and dealing with state regulatory bodies as a mortgage broker, dealing with the California Department of Real Estate, dealing with audits, things of that nature, you start to, grow a ever increasing anger towards the state where you're just like, these people are terrible at what they do. I'm great at what I do, and they are making my job harder unnecessarily. Not to mention, they're draining me of resources that I could be using to grow my company. Uh, I mean, there's so many examples throughout my life where I just go, "Oh my God, we need to, abolish everything." That those are many examples. I think also after 9/11, the war on terror, the Patriot Act. I mean, there's the TSA, NSA spying with Snowden, the leaks from Julian Assange, then his persecution, along with Snowden's persecution. I mean, the list goes on and on. There are so many examples of moments where I became more and more convinced that the state was not there to defend my liberty, and in fact, it was always the thing that was encroaching upon it. So, yeah, I'm sorry that's a very wide ranging answer, but I think those are all parts that made me more entrenched in this worldview.
And you know, the entrepreneurial spirit. Did it start young? What was kind of like your first hustle that you remember doing where you sometimes look back at it and maybe say, "Oh, well, obviously I'm older now. I scaled it up, but I remember that as a kid or something like that." Do you have any
Oh
type of
yeah,
story like that?
dude. Oh, I got a great one for you. When I was in 6th grade, I remember all the kids were like crazy about Fun Dip, and for those that don't know, it's this little candy stick and this powder. Basically, it looks like colored cocaine, and you just dip the stick in it, and you eat the candy, you eat the powdered sugar. And it was being sold for $1 in the student store at my middle school. And I went to, at the time it was called Price Club because I'm old, but now it's called Costco. And I was there with my dad, and we're going through the aisles, and I see this like big bulk thing of Fun Dip, and I look at the price, and I'm like, it's like $13 for like 100 of these packs or something. So I asked my dad, I'm like looking at the price at the bottom. I'm like, how much is it per unit? And like, if you ever look when you're going through the store, if you look at the bottom of the price, there's usually a per unit pricing, and it was like 11.3 cents per. And I quickly do the math because I had always had a kind of entrepreneurial math based brain for whatever reason, and I was like 11 cents, so I can sell these for like 9x markup, or if I can undercut the student store and sell them for 5x based off of my cost. And I was like, Dad, can I buy these and then go sell them at school? Because they're selling them for $1 and I can sell them for 50 cents. I can corner the market. And he's like, yeah, yeah, go for it. So I did that. I start making $100 a week in profit, and that was my first entrepreneurial hustle. I also got suspended from school for it,
Nice.
because they don't want competition. But I think that lesson, just seeing market demand, meeting the need, undercutting your competitor, like these are all lessons that I didn't know I was doing, consciously at the time, but that's what it is. That's what competition is. And by the time I got older, it just I had already had the experience with that. I also sold burnt CDs that I would like pirate off the internet. I sold them in high school, and then my freshman year of college, I sold weed for a little bit. So yeah, I've been an entrepreneurial for a long time.
That's funny that you say that story. Uh my story is funny, but it's funny, man, because you say that story, and even though we're libertarian guys or liberty guys, my path. It's funny now that I'm listening to you, and it's funny that I bid on work, and I do construction now for like municipalities. Like you bid on jobs, and you win them, you lose them, or whatever, right? And it's funny because right now, as you're telling me that story, I knew my story. My first hustle was, people, kids had the free lunch, right? And the ones that really had free lunch also got free dessert. And there was the people that had to pay for lunch, and pay for desserts and all that shit. And I remember that there was the kids that didn't eat their desserts, and
Yeah, yeah,
they got them for free.
yeah.
So I went to them and I said, "Hey, I'll buy it for a quarter off of you." And then the other guys, they would buy them for $1. So I just sold it to them for 75. I was just the middleman. And I remember,
Yep.
I don't know why. Yeah, just like
Dude,
you.
that's the
I mean,
same thing.
just like you, I was just like, I'm not a good reader. I know I don't articulate sometimes the things the right way, but for some reason, numbers and
You
math
got the
and
business
and
sense.
stuff. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's always made a lot of sense to me. But it's funny that I'm still working connected a little bit to the state, but you went the other way of like, what I'm saying? Like when I say the state, meaning like, the state got mad at you and they suspended you, but I'm still kind of connected in a way in that like I'll still, I still bid on jobs like that, but I don't
Well,
know.
for the record, the state didn't suspend me. I ended my license of my own volition. But yeah, they did audit me, and that was like
No, I mean,
thousands of
suspended from
dollars.
school.
And oh, yeah, 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 yeah. They did do that, absolutely.
That's what I mean. Like, yeah, like you got in trouble. Like, no one, nobody got mad at me. I guess. I mean, I never got in trouble. I was just doing it. I mean, for a while, and I always just think it's funny and stuff like that. But it's just these stories stay with us. For a
Yeah.
long time.
Well, the reason I like to tell this story is because there's probably a lot of parents that are listening, and I would like for them to encourage their kids with these paths. Like, even if it, isn't necessarily, I don't know, the quote unquote the perfectly right thing to do to have your kids selling candy to other kids in middle school. Well, the school's doing it, and like the kid is your son or your daughter is going to learn a lot about how the world works through that process. So like if they ever come to you with that type of idea, I mean, even if it's like getting a paperboy job, I don't even know if that's a thing anymore. They probably have adults doing it now in cars, but allowing our children to learn what hard work amounts to, learn what earning, based off of your own efforts can derive for you in your personal life. I think that these are all lessons that ultimately will enable a young person to feel as if they are capable of providing for themselves. And ultimately, the more capable people feel in their own lives and their own day to day, the less likely they are to want a very powerful state that is allegedly going to take care of everything for them, because that's not how it works. So I think that the entrepreneurial spirit is part of the reason that America was so successful, and I think that the fact that we're losing it is a huge part of the reason that this country is starting to decay. So I think that it's a very important aspect of libertarian ideology that doesn't get discussed nearly enough. We need far more entrepreneurs and far less employees if we're to reclaim that level of independence, particularly when it comes to ESG and the encroachment into quote unquote private businesses decision making. You really can't work for the man anymore and still have a voice. I mean, cancel culture and everything else. Not to mention the funding that comes through BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. It's very complicated. We don't have to get into all of it, but it's going to be harder and harder to work for a corporate job or work for the state itself and maintain your own autonomy and speak out against the injustices you see in the world.
Yeah, uh the reason I reached out to you for an interview is because I'm like on a chat with a bunch of homies, and we were talking real estate because I that's what I do too. I develop land, and I try to build little houses, but I'm barely getting into my first like apartment complex development. And somebody said, "Oh, you should talk to Clint. That's what that's what he got into." And yeah, I mean, I've jammed your shows,
Yep.
and I've jammed a little bit of the Tower Gang, and your when you come on with Dave Smith, and I've jammed your stuff, and I was like, yeah, you know what? Let me reach out to him, and so I guess this is the part of where like it kind of gets more into the business side of it because I don't know, man. I mean, I guess the general question is like, what is a private money mortgage? That's what you've said you
Sure.
did. I mean, I'm assuming that, if I was to freestyle, that there's people that aren't banks that want their money invested in real estate projects, and you're
Yeah.
the guy that connects the people to the developers, something like, or to the that's what it is.
To
Okay. And how do you get into
either
that?
the
Like, how did you get into your whole line of work, man? Like, the freestyle and the work. I
sure,
mean, I
sure.
want to people to know, or.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, that was a pretty good description. The only thing is, like, most of my loans weren't development loans because there's such an extraordinary amount of risk when it comes to developing real estate, especially if it hasn't already been subdivided, things like that. You can run into. I'm actually doing my first project and my last ever. I'm building 6 houses in South San Diego, and it's taken me 4 effing years. So I
Wow.
will never do that again. Yeah, it's been hell.
But why?
Fortunately,
Can I
I'm
ask why?
nearing the end of that.
Is it the bureaucratic stuff? I know that Bill
Yeah.
Maher. I'm a Bill Maher fan. I always watch the shows, and he was trying to do a little shed shit in the back of his house, and he would always post about how it took him like two
Yep.
years to build this little chingadera, dude. It's
Yeah,
like
dude.
nothing, man. And I mean, can I ask like what That seems long,
Yeah.
right?
No,
That's long, right?
yeah, I'll tell you. I'll tell you. I mean, it was supposed to be a year and a half start to finish. I bought an infill piece of property that was in this little gully in National City, which is like 10 minutes south of downtown San Diego. And I thought it was going to be in and out. I thought I was going to be done before the lockdowns even happened. In fact, I didn't even go vertical until years later, which is insane. By vertical, I just mean starting to build the project. I know you know, but the audience may not. And I mean, there was a litany of issues, but the city every step of the way has been uncooperative. It took me 3 months just to get my power turned on one of the houses that I have completed that's going to be selling next week. The lockdowns allowed for the the city planning department to just basically stop working for a year, which
Mm.
killed me. Um, there's that. There's easement issues. I had to negotiate with neighbors that ultimately I didn't think I was going to have to. When it came to water rights and power rights and things like that, I had to pay ransoms. I had to. Good lord, man.
Wow.
I mean, the list of issues I ran into. Had I known all of the things that were going to pop up, I would have never done it because National City was allegedly a very friendly building department. But then when the lockdowns happened, I think everything just fell apart. Well, the head planner at the city that was supposedly good. He like got COVID and then he took like 9 months off and they wouldn't assign me to a different project manager or there wasn't one. I don't even know. I mean, it was all insane. It was just insane. So just be cautious. Be cautious. And I think most states it's not as bad, but California in particular, man, it's a nightmare.
Yeah. So then,
I didn't even
yeah,
explain what my business was. Sorry.
yeah.
So I got caught up in the project. The business was, yes, you described it perfectly. There's private investors that want to lend out money securitized or collateralized by real estate, but they want to do it in a conservative fashion. There's borrowers that don't qualify for financing from a bank because either they're self-employed, they don't have provable income, their credit's a little bit beat up because they had a foreclosure or something, but they're still high income earners, they're still very stable, they still have a down payment that's significant. Those people are all people that I'm willing to work with because as long as they'll have skin in the game, say they have 30% to put down, they just need someone to come in with 70%. That's a pretty conservative loan. So even if your credit's beat up, but you have the income to service the loan, why wouldn't I do that? So I do interest only loans, usually in the 9% range, no prepayment penalty. So, like, say you're rebuilding your credit, you think you're going to be able to refinance in a year. Well, sure, you're paying a higher interest rate, but you're only going to pay that 9% for a year. And then, you can refinance into a 4% mortgage at the time. Now it's all the way up to 7.5%, so it's not much of a difference anymore. But yeah, that's what we did, and I did hundreds of millions of dollars of loans, or I brokered hundreds of millions of dollars of loans for my investors. Made a lot of developers and real estate investors pretty wealthy, as well as hundreds of investors that I worked with personally. So yeah, they're all very upset that I closed up shop, but the Dodd-Frank, after the 0809 real estate collapse, really tried to essentially criminalize my industry, even though I was one of the only legit operators that was not doing any sort of shenanigans. I was very upfront. I didn't do adjustable rate mortgages. I didn't have prepayment penalties. I was just like, this is what I'm offering. If you're interested, great. If you're not, that's fine. There was no BS or anything like that. But even doing it, straight up, it's just not looked upon favorably in the state of California anymore. And ultimately, it's because the regulations are written by the big banks and they don't want competition. So they're driving out all the little guys.
Is it were they also looking at that, if when you mentioned somebody that has bad credit, or like when or they can't verify their income, is were they looking at that as like I don't know, like drug dealers, or what were they saying? Why was it like? I'm just asking now, like, why would Dodd Frank? So yeah, I understand the part of they don't want the competition, but um, you still could have.
Yeah, the
But don't you encourage them to then get conventional loans later on, right, to cash out your investors?
yeah,
Or
of course.
so then what
Yeah,
was the
no, I
beef?
want I want them to pay us off.
What was the beef then? Like it was just gonna be
I
more
want them to
regulations.
Yeah, I want them to pay us off, as soon as they can, because I make money on the turnover to a new loan. So I was fine with them paying us off in 3 months if they could. And I was never trying to lend to anybody to end up owning the property. That's way more headache than it's worth, and ultimately way more risk for my investors. My investors just wanted a steady 9% annualized return if they could get it, and I wanted to make a couple points on the origination. And it was a great business. So the reason that they were able to justify this crackdown was because, ironically, the conventional banks were giving a lot of crazy, horrific loans to people, including the adjustable rate mortgages that ultimately were the precursor to the real estate collapse in 0809. Because as those mortgages adjusted upward, they snapped from 2% interest rate up to 7-8%, and all of a sudden the person couldn't afford the payments anymore. They ended up having to be foreclosed on or walk away entirely, and that created the flood of inventory that ultimately brought the housing market down by 40% in many markets, even 50% in some. So their justification was that, well, these guys are charging the highest interest rates because they're quote unquote hard money, so they must also be bad actors. The truth of the matter is that the worst actors were the conventional banks themselves. They were the ones that were doing they were called ninja loans, no income, no assets, no job, no problem. Like you just had a pulse and they'd lend you as much money as you could possibly ask for. So those are the scumbags. Those are the people that should be put out of business. Those are the people that sure as hell shouldn't be bailed out when their entire loan portfolio blows up. But that's not how it works. So they blame people like me when it was actually them that were doing the worst deals. I had almost no foreclosures in my portfolio. I think I had 2 foreclosures in my entire tenure, my entire 10 years of running my company. So like I was a very conservative, very high quality broker, and I would put my portfolio up against any bank out there. I was crushing it. So they're just liars and thieves and scumbags, and they're deep in the pockets of the government, and the government's deep in the pockets of the big banks, and that's what it is, man. I know it sounds as if I'm just like you know playing the victim here, but like truly, they are the ones that were perpetrating the worst possible loans out there, and they were the reasons that the 0809 collapse happened. So Dodd-Frank just it allegedly was there to help the people, but ultimately it was there to help their donors. Just story as old as time.
Yeah, and when you talk about the 0809 collapse, can you kind of intertwine there, like the libertarian thought of like or actually like the Austrian business cycle of booms and bust,
Absolutely.
and then how any net worth that I have, I also bought real estate after the crash. and it's worked out for
Me
me
too.
because I knew some of that. I'm still waiting for the crash, so I'm trying to see what's when that happens. But I say that like because I was successful, but it's also like no, I'm also don't really want to crash because a lot of people are gonna get hurt again. But
Yep.
I don't know. Can you kind of intertwine some of the how it being right there front row seat, how it built up the collapse and then the opportunities that are coming for anybody that might be holding on to some capital to try to get some deals.
For sure, man. Yeah, I mean, I remember I was a very young person at the time, but oh 04, oh 05, oh 06, when the market was going gangbusters, I was telling all my friends and family to sell, and they were all looking at me like I was crazy. But the reason I understood it is because I understand that the price of money, which is what interest rates are, is the most important market signal that exists because it's telling the global economy how much risk exists with this loan, this investment, whatever. Because we have a monopoly essentially on interest rate setting via the Federal Reserve, uh, there is tremendous malinvestment, which just means bad investments. That stems from keeping interest rates artificially low when risk parameters should dictate that the interest rates should be much higher to reflect that risk to the market.
Let me
But
interrupt real quick. When you say
okay,
risk, you really mean like the tolerance of risk that somebody, an investor or a banker wants to put in, right? So I just want to like so when interest rates are low, the signal is that
that there's no
that
risk.
people that there's no risk, right? Okay. So just
Yep.
so my audience knows, like when you say risk, it means the tolerant, right? Some of that, right? Okay, go ahead. Sorry,
Yeah.
man. Just wanted
Yeah.
to.
Yeah. No, that's a great clarification. Because I did this for so long, if I ever talk over my audience's head, I love it when people ask me to clarify. Yeah, that's essentially what it means. It's just like that's the market signal. Like if you're going to lend to someone, perfect example, right? If you have terrible credit, the bank will either reject your loan or they'll charge you a higher interest rate. Like you may not be able to get a home loan, but you're able to get that credit card loan, right? That credit card loan is like 17, 18, 20%. Well, the reason that they're pricing it higher is because there's way more risk. I mean, part of the reason the credit card rates are so much higher is because they're not collateralized, which means you can just file bankruptcy and walk away from that debt. With real estate, it is collateralized, so usually the interest rate is going to be far lower, and that's how it ought to work because you have an asset that you can reclaim if the borrower fails to perform on their loan, as the creditor. I'm speaking. So the reason I knew that the market was not long to last is because they had maintained interest rates. Even back then, it was 6 or 6.5% was kind of the 30-year mortgage rate. But the real problem was that they created what were called adjustable rate mortgages, or ARMs, is what people in my industry called it, and they allowed for people that didn't have any actual evidence of income to qualify for loans. You just had to go and say and lie on the mortgage application saying, yeah, I make $250,000 a year. It's like, oh, actually, I've been unemployed for 18 months, but this market continues to climb, 15% year over year. So I'm just going to buy it, lie, get the bank loan. The bank guy doesn't care because it's ultimately being sold off to Fannie and Freddie, which will ultimately be bailed out by the Federal Reserve and the Congress of the United States. So there's all of the risk is just totally out of whack. Like there's because the taxpayer is on the hook at the end of the day. Everyone is behaving in a terrible fashion. And the other reason I knew that the market was not going to last very long is because the prices were just so extraordinary. I mean, you had starter homes. We're back to those price levels, by the way. But the at the time, starter homes when I was a kid were like 300 grand or something. I was in San Diego, and then in the '06 period, starter homes got up to like $600,000. So they had doubled in like a 10-year period. Anytime you see an asset that doubles in a 10-year period, especially something that's been around for a long time, we're not talking about cryptocurrency. We're not talking about some new market class or market. We're talking about something that has been around forever, and real estate, like housing. So if you see it double in a 10-year period, something's really off. And if you're not experiencing inflation that is rampant across the market where you're seeing a 10% or a doubling in 10 years of all assets, well, then that means that there is an artificial stimuli that is making this market rapidly increase in value. So I just knew, instinctually, and also with my Austrian economics background, also with my entrepreneurial background, that this was not going to last. So I was telling people to sell 050607. Obviously, Ron Paul was giving the same warnings on the congressional House floor because he understood the same stuff I did, probably on a deeper level because he's been around the block a lot longer than I had at that time. And then sure enough, 0809 comes and you start to see the derivatives market blows up. And this is the other thing I have to, explain to people is that uh, because you had so much debt that was being issued against real estate, they had to find a way to create additional liquidity to continue to increase this Ponzi scheme. And the way they did that is they would take the debt of all, like they would take these tranches of all of these first mortgages that were collateralized against real estate that were being dumped onto Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac's books. And then they would collateralize those, they would put them into a tranche, and then they would sell those off to, say, pension funds or whatever. And they would get additional liquidity so that they could roll that capital back out, deploy more loans, continue to blow the bubble up even further. So by the time I realized that was happening, I knew it was going to be cataclysmic because then you have Bear Stearns that goes under. You start to see contagion risk. You start to see this cascading effect of defaults that just traverse the entire globe. And you have central bankers that are in total panic mode because they're like, oh my God, like the entire banking system is going to implode because there's hundreds of trillions of dollars in derivatives contracts that are predicated on these shitty mortgages that should have never been given out. Oops. So that's how it went down. And we didn't learn our lesson. Instead, we drove out, people like me from the industry, and we allowed for, JP Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo and Bank of America and all these other scumbags to become even bigger than they once were. The too big to fail moniker that they used to justify the bailouts in 0809. Well, they allowed them to become bigger. Mission accomplished. Good job, guys.
Yeah, and I remember that time because even if you weren't invested in real estate, everybody still felt it. Everybody felt something. I mean, and right
It
now
was brutal.
right now I got a lot of primos calling me, "Hey, tienes trabajo?" And these guys working found concrete, and like, what's going on? He's like, they're not, they're slowing down the builds. The spec homes,
Yep.
they're not selling, they're not building, or they're telling us to wait. But and that time
It's
there was
starting.
yeah, not in that time there was um like the bad loans written to people that shouldn't have gotten loans. Some of that did get cleaned up. I know that you can't just do stated income anymore and all that.
Mhm.
But there's still a bubble because it's obvious to some of us that know a bubble when you see one. But how is this new one? How is this bubble going to play out? Because it is different because there isn't those type of loans. I don't know the dynamics of why people are still paying a lot. I mean, I'm about to sell a house. I'm gonna list one here, a little duplex that I got. I'm gonna clean up some of my properties to get good capital to do this apartment complex. So I'm just cleaning it up. But I mean, I want them to pay a lot of money. I don't know who's gonna, somebody's gonna. I mean, but what's going
Someone
on
will.
right now? What's going on? Like, are people combining incomes? Because now not everybody can live on their own. They have to combine two or three incomes to live in. I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know what's. I mean, what is from your
It's
expertise, like what's going on and how is it going to play out?
it's very complicated. So I'm going to have to bring up a lot of factors to
Sure, man.
explain this.
I like this kind of stuff,
First
man. This
off,
kind of stuff is cool, man.
yeah, no, this will be great, particularly with the industry you're in. So the first issue is that supply is very low, and that is there's many reasons for that, but the obviously the state apparatus that regulates construction has been a huge problem for a very long time. It has prevented builders from delivering the inventory necessary for the market. There was also the foreclosure and eviction moratorium that happened for well over a year during COVID that allowed people not to perform on their loan, but also not be forced out of the property. So that kept that inventory off the market from people that otherwise could not afford those loans. That's a huge part of the reason that you saw this massive run up in pricing over the past 2 years. What else? There's also the bailouts that came through the COVID relief bill. Uh, Enormous unemployment benefits that were given to people for a very long time that weren't working. Obviously, that allows them either to continue to pay their rent, which helps out the landlord, which keeps that inventory off of the market from being sold, or it helps out the homeowner themselves, who's even if they were laid off for a year, still had enough income to maintain those payments. Also, Many of them didn't have to make those payments because they just told the bank that they couldn't make those payments. The banks wrote them off, but they were still taking in unemployment, so they stockpiled a lot of cash. Many of those people are probably now in the market for buying additional housing inventory, things like that. You also have the inflationary pressures that are coming from the stimulus package that was catastrophically stupid, and I think that's driving a lot of buying pressure and making people feel as if like, well, rent is extraordinarily high, so even though I'm buying this house for an astronomical price, I don't want to continue to pay these rent prices, and there's this psychological trend where you see prices increasing year over year, even if it's not logical, even if it's like if you're actually thinking rationally, you'd be like, oh, that's a terrible investment. Well, you get to a point of exhaustion where you just go like, I just don't want to wait anymore. I don't want to pay $2,500 a month in rent for the next 5 years waiting for this bubble to burst, because I've been waiting for 3 years and I've seen the prices go up another 30%. So it's kind of like the last, I don't even know what there is a financial term for it, but it's just basically like following the herd. It's just a terrible way to invest. It ultimately ends up being like you're the person that's going to end up left holding the bag. So personally, I think it's a terrible time to be purchasing real estate. But there are many reasons that this is a very different market than 0809. As you said, there is not so many adjustable rate mortgages that are going to snap up and kick people out in droves. There isn't enough inventory. I think that the real issue is that there's going to be in my opinion, a very steep recession at some point in the next year or two. And when you see layoffs that hit people, that's when you'll start to see the inventory hit the market. And when the inventory hits the market and you start to see prices start to drop and you start to see inflation pressures decrease, you'll see a lot of people list their houses for sale all at once because they'll realize that the trend is now reversing and they'll try and exit because they want to take those capital gains off the table. And once you see that trend reverse, it's kind of a last man to the lifeboat mentality where like everybody tries to sell at once. And then that's where you get that flood of inventory. You have a flood of inventory. That means that prices come down very rapidly. So I think like that's what I expect to see happen. But if the Federal Reserve is right now has been hiking interest rates very aggressively, which is putting a ton of pressure on this market. It's making the cost of mortgages very, very high, and the monthly payments very, very high, and it's driving a lot of first time buyers out of this market. If they continue with this path, which Jerome Powell, the head of the Fed, has sworn he's going to continue to do, I think that you will see less and less people able to buy this housing, and more people start to sell. And the alternative is that the Fed reverses course, they reduce interest rates, and they continue to allow inflation to just tear our economy to shreds. So it's going to be painful either way, but it's going to be one or the other. It's either going to be an inflationary cycle where housing isn't demolished, or it's going to be a deflationary cycle because the interest rates are held too high for too long and ultimately crushes consumer demands.
Yeah, man. I hear everything you're saying. I remember I would always tell people like, man, are you sure you want to buy a house? It's probably like on the high end of the high side, but that was like 3 or 4 years ago. So yeah,
Exactly, dude. Exactly.
I just don't even say anything anymore because I also remember selling. I subdivided a little one lot into two, and they were little spec homes. And I remember telling my wife this was in 2016, and I remember just telling her, we got to sell these houses now because the crash is coming. The crash is coming.
I know.
And then right now I know like if we could have held on to them, we could have gotten like 100 grand each more on them. Like chingao.
For sure, dude.
But
For
like
sure.
you still go on your fundamental. Like I mean, you have to go on your own fundamentals, But like,
Yeah.
so yeah, that is one thing that's still like, we bring up Ron Paul and we kind of and I've kind of started to think like, and this is going to tie in a lot of stuff here. You know, does the libertarian message and the people that give the message out and the Libertarian Party, like, do all of these things, these have the credibility to be able to get out of the two-party system or to break out of it? I know that you guys are trying to, I wouldn't say reform the party, but you're trying to bring new life into it, right? with some of the stuff that you guys got going on, especially with trying to see if Dave Smith, the comedian, will and podcaster will try to run for president, and anything's possible now after Trump. Anything's possible, but I guess like like so someone like Ron Paul would be talking about the collapse of the dollar forever, and it hasn't
Yeah.
come. And there's a time, and I would say that out of respecting of Ron Paul, I mean that dude's like a hero to mine. It's like there's a time where you can understand why people be like, he's been saying that forever. But it's okay.
Yeah.
He personally has chingles of gold. I'm pretty positive. He's been buying gold forever, probably, right? But like, so he's good. But like, you can tell, like, oh, well, they've been saying that forever, or oh yeah, the crash is coming, and like how we get dismissed a little bit until we're right. But that right comes at a time where they forget about how, I don't know. I'm just trying to, I don't know. I'm trying to freestyle a question here, but I'm trying to say, right? We're trying to ask a little bit.
I do. I totally understand. And I think that the problem is, in my opinion, and this is going to be unpopular amongst many libertarians, but I think that people like Peter Schiff and Ron Paul, Schiff doesn't really have an excuse because he's been in the investment world for a long time. So I don't understand why he doesn't understand that the dollar reserve status globally is what allows them to spend in such a profligate fashion. Like, the reason that the dollar hasn't died in Peter Schiff's timeline is because I don't think he understands that the military industrial complex's defense of the dollar in terms of what the majority of the global trading world uses. I think over half of all trading worldwide is done in the US dollar. So because of that, there's an immense amount of demand for the US dollar. Like, no matter how much we print, there's a huge amount of demand for it. Now that's changing finally because of the inflation that we're experiencing. But that's the reason he's been wrong. I'll just say it bluntly. Peter Schiff has been wrong about gold because he didn't understand that the US dollar was ultimately going to last a lot longer than he expected because of the US dollar's reserve status, global reserve status. And I think that was the problem, is like, well, he had the proper diagnosis. He was missing a variable that made his timeline completely wrong. And I think that many libertarians suffer from this, particularly because they only listen to guys like Schiff. And I think that's part of the reason that I've been successful, with my show, is because I do understand this stuff in a little bit different fashion. I'm not going to say deeper. I don't want to be condescending to him because I think he's a brilliant guy. But I think he just got it wrong because he didn't understand that particular factor. And it's a huge, huge factor. So I think that, like, the most important thing when it comes to libertarian and Austrian economics and our speakers and our role in the political narrative, or the economic narrative for that matter, is that we really reach people when we get our predictions right. Because Ron Paul's warning about real estate in 2003, 4, 5 looked very prescient because it happened, pretty soon after. It was 4 or 5 years later. So I think that, like, if you can have the right analysis and the right timeline, that's the hardest thing to do as a money manager, by the way. So, like, I'm not besmirching anyone for getting the timeline wrong, because it is very, very tough to do. If we could all do it, we'd all be billionaires, right? Like, it's a lot easier said than done. But I think that that's really important, is that, like, when we're warning about these things, we need to be very cautious about being declaratory in our timelines. Like, Schiff has been like, by this, for 15 years, he's like, by next year, this time, gold will be at $3,500 an ounce, or 5,000 or 10,000 an ounce. It's like, you're wrong, dude. You're just wrong. I'm sorry. Like, and you're lying to the people, and you're screwing them over because they're investing in this asset that is ultimately not absorbing the majority of the inflation. In fact, cryptocurrency has been the space that has absorbed much of the inflationary hedging that we've seen. And he also doesn't believe in cryptocurrency, and he thinks it's a Ponzi and it's crap and all that. I think he's wrong about that too. So I don't know. I don't know how you solve that, other than to say that, like, there are people out there in our space like myself, and I don't want to put myself up to, like, brag or anything, but, like, I had a better analysis of this stuff over the past 3 years, and to be honest, over my entire career, than Schiff did. So I don't know how to put it without sounding as if I'm, elevating myself over him, because I really don't want to do that. But I'm just being honest. Like, there are people in our scene that do understand this stuff and have gotten the timelines right. And it's just like, well, then you ought to be listening to them. And you ought to be like, well, I think you should still listen to Schiff. You should just understand, yeah, he's been saying the same shit for 15 years. Like, be careful. Be careful. His timeline could be off.
Yeah, I want to be respectful of your time. So I'm thinking that maybe I can have you back on another time to talk about like ESG and the Great Reset and a bunch of stuff. I know you get into that, but before I let you go, I watched your Timcast show that you were recently on, and you spoke about having your two strikes on YouTube. I don't know what is the current status of that, and then just speak to what you got going on in your show. I know you also mentioned on there that you got signed or you're gonna sign with Gas Digital Network, which is a network that has a lot of prominent like libertarian people that are on there. So I don't know, man. Go ahead and
Really, it's just
freestyle on
yeah,
on your show.
it's actually just prominent comedians. Really, Dave Smith is like the only, and I guess Malice may still be on Gas, but um, I hate to break it to you, man, but the Gas Digital signing is a marketing ploy to get Gas to sign us. We
Nice.
we gameplay. Actually, this was my idea on Tower Gang like 3 weeks ago. I said, dude, we should just like have Top draft a shirt and say that Gas signed us, and just go on Timcast and tell a million people and lie through our teeth and see if they'll sign us. Apparently, Top Lobster, who works for Gas Digital, was in studio with them just yesterday in New York, and he said that like I'm like a meme in Gas Digital, where like they're just all talking about it. They can't believe that we did that. I think that Lewis really appreciates. I mean, I gave him a plug for gasdigital.com, on to 1 million+ people. Like that's a big thing to do. So I think he's watching us now. I think he's taking us more seriously, and I hope that he'll sign us. But as for Liberty Lockdown, I got struck for having James Lindsay on, and he basically gave the same spiel he did on Tim Pool. I won't retell it just in case you put this somewhere, and I don't want you to get a strike. But they hit me for dangerous conspiracy theory, and I, for the life of me, I can't figure out what was dangerous about it. Like, even in that interview, I explained very explicitly we do not want to see political violence at all. I think it's very counter to our goals, and ultimately it would enable the state to crack down very aggressively upon people, increasing the tyranny we're already experiencing. So it's bizarre. And then the episode that I put up after my 1 week suspension, before it was even published, they struck me for medical misinformation when I was just countering Sam Harris's latest meltdown. So very good news, though. Iraq veteran who's got an enormous YouTube channel. He was on my show a week ago, and he has a personal rep over at YouTube that he put me in contact with, and I spoke with him today. He is now reviewing those strikes and trying to get them lifted. So hopefully I can be back on YouTube here soon. If anybody wants to check it out, it's Liberty Lockdown. You can just search for that, or Clint Russell. They probably both come up. Make sure you guys hit subscribe, because on Thursday I have Dave Smith, and on Friday I have Jesse Kelly, who replaced Rush Limbaugh. He's one of the funniest, biggest conservative talk show hosts out there. So two enormous episodes that are coming up this week. And other than that, Tower Gang is just like, if you like to laugh at the insanity of the world, we're very, very, very off color, very overtly racist just because we think it's funny, even though none of us are actually racist. Very sexist, same reasoning. It's just like insane. So if you guys are into that, you'd probably enjoy that as well.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, man. Thanks for coming on. And like I said, maybe I could try to have you back on and we can talk about some other subjects. I know we have a time. Respect your time, but yeah, thanks for coming on, and appreciate it. Peace.
Hell yeah, brother.